Hey, Chad here with LearnMixedReality.com, and I'm glad you're joining me on this journey as we're creating a game from start to finish that runs on mixed reality devices. The game we're making is a simple shell game where you got to pick the right item. You have 3 chances, or really 2 chances. Your last chance, you don't gain any points by guessing on your last try, obviously. So far, we have the game logic hooked up. We have our level so far, which is, this wonderful looking table and these wonderful looking items. And inside the items, we have the P's. Last time we created these text objects, score and high score, and our strike text. And we hooked up the logic to set the score to our actual internal score and to set the strike text appropriately. This session, we're actually going to set the high score text. We're going to create the whole logic behind our high scores and persist it out so when you launch the game next time that the high score will still be there. Okay, so let's go and dig right in. We're going to jump to Visual Studio, and under Assets, under Scripts, I'm going to right click and I'm going to add a new class. We'll call it high score. And this class is going to be public, but it's also going to be static. So we only need one of these. And internally, I'm going to have a value I'm keeping track of my high score. So I'm going to say, private static int, and we'll call it high score. And in fact, this needs to be a property. So I'm just going to use a shortcut here. So prop full. Hit tab a couple times, and here we go. So we got a private int of high score, and but since my class is called high score, I can't name this property high score, so I'm going to just call it value, like that. Now, but this I want it to be static, so I'm going to say private static and public static. Now that would be fine, but I actually want my setter here to do a little bit of logic. So I only want to set high score if the value that's being set here is greater than our high score. So that's it. We're going to have a simple high score class that has a property called value, and it's going to return, if somebody calls high score.value, it's going to return the high score. If they set high score.value, then it's only going to actually truly set the internal value if the value they passed in is greater than high score. That way the actual game logic doesn't have to keep track of that. It can just constantly be setting the high score, and the high score class will know whether it should truly honor that high score or not. Now, we actually need a way to save the high scores and load them to persist them. And to do that, we're going to piggyback off of Unity's functionality here called player prefs. To start, let's go and just create a static method here. We'll call it save high score. That way our game controller can call high score dot save high score, and it will save the internal high score. So we might do that when the game's over, when the user's about ready to exit, things of that nature. So we're just going to call player prefs, and this is a Unity class. So we need to hit Control Dot and bring in using Unity Engine. Okay. Now that we've done that, we can actually call the static method on this class setInt, because that's our score. We're saving, it's an integer is what our value is, so we might as well call save int, and we need to give it some name, a key, and then the value. Of course, our value is going to be our high score. The key, might as well just make it high score, like that. And just like we're saving the score, we'd also need to load the high score. So we'll do another one, public void or static void. And we'll say load high score. High score is equal to player prefs, and we want to get init this time, and we need to figure out what is the key, so we know that it's high score. And then we can actually give it a default value. So if this is the first time we're trying to load the high score and a high score has never been saved, what do we want the high score to be? And I want the high score simply to be 0. Because it is. The game's brand new, it's been freshly installed or whatever the case is. We don't have any high scores logged, and so it's going to return to 0 instead of throwing an error or what have you. Alright, so that is our super complex high score class. I'm going to get rid of these other usings I'm not using. And let's go back up here to game controller. And let's go up here to where we're actually starting the game. After we hook up our core logic events, let's go and do a high score dot. And it's not finding it, so let me go ahead and compile. And now that we compiled, hopefully we can see our high score class now. Oh, we're not, because it has a namespace. When I hit control dot here, it's wanting to use assets.script. So since I added the script that way, I actually want to go here to our high score and get rid of this namespace. And we'll just back these up one, save that. And I'm going to say close all windows but this one. And now we have our access to high score, so we're going to call high score.load high score. So again, we're starting up. And when we're starting up, we want to load in the high score. It'd be nice to go ahead and actually display that high score at this point. So let's just call, let's see, update high score. I'm going to hit control dot to actually generate that method. And all we want to do here is say high score text dot text is equal to we want to be what, high score colon and then our actual high score. And so that's going to be high score dot value, right? So we don't have to keep track of anything high score here in our game controller. We can just use the static high score class, and we're going to set that when it comes. So the very first time we load the game, it's going to load the high score, and it's going to basically return 0. And then we're going to set the high score text to whatever our high score value is. Now we need a way to actually save the high score. And of course we already have that in the class, but we need to actually set the high score. So let's do that. That only matters if we're in the game over. So when the game is over, here, this is where we would want to, before we actually remove our score of 0, this is where we want to say high score dot value is equal to score. And again, if our score is actually less than what the high score is, we don't need to worry about it, because the high score property is setting that only if a score is greater than that. And then we want to say high score dot save high score. So we'll save this. Now, since this is just a single player game, we're not doing any kind of authentication. Nobody's logging in here. This is simply a single high score that the player's playing against themselves. Or if they hand the headset to somebody else and they're playing against them, then that's fine. It's just bragging rights of did I beat your high score? Did you beat mine? So we're not doing any kind of player authentication or anything like that for this. It's simply a local high score. Most of the time you'll just be playing against yourself trying to beat your own high score. So let's go to Unity and actually hit play and make sure that the player prefs are working as we would expect. So we see our high score is 0 because it ran the player prefs code, remember? So over here in high score, it ran the load high scores. There was no player prefs set, so it couldn't find this key of high score, so it just returned the default value of 0. Okay, and so now we're going to actually play. So we have a 3, and we don't have anything, nothing, and a first strike. What I would like to have happen is when we beat our high score, is I would like for that 3 to show up here for the high score. as we were beating the high score, we want the high score to be updated. So we know that we are currently have the high score. So I'm going to just stop this and jump back over here to our code. And our game controller, so we're saving the high score here in our game over, but what I also want to do is set that high score, if appropriate, when we actually make a match. So if a match is made, I want to set the high score value to that score. And then I want that to be displayed, so I want to call update high score, which is going to actually change the text. Okay. So let's go back over here to Unity. We'll hit play. And of course, we're going to get 0 the first time because we just exited out of the game. We didn't actually get the game over event. So we have 0, and now we have a 3, and our high score is also 3. High score is 5 now. 7. Got our first strike. Second strike. All right, third strike. And a high score of 24. So our score got reset to 0. Our high score remains the same. We see 3. And in fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to exit out of here real quick and come back in, and we should see the high score be 24, and it is. So it stored it in the player prefs, and now it pulled it back up. And so let's just play a little bit here and see what happens when we play the game and don't update the high score. So we get 0, and our high score did not get updated to that because our regular score is only 3. First strike. Going to see if we can actually beat that high score. All right, so here we go. All right, so here we are at 22 and 25, and our high score got updated to 25. And now we're done with the game. Went back to 0. We're going to stop playing, come back in, and of course we're going to expect our high score to be persisted at 25. And it is. Great. So that is the high score logic complete from start to finish. Where last session we actually created the actual text object, but this week we created our class to use Unity's player prefs to actually save the high score and to load the high score. We are updating the high score every time we make a match, so that way if we beat the high score, our high score is going to basically match the same thing as score. And of course, when the game is over, we also set the high score. Now, what we're not accounting for is if the game crashes or the user exits in some way without actually doing game over and they had the high score. Right now, it's not going to be persisted. So, it depends on how you want to do that. If you actually want to take the hit of writing out to player prefs every time, if you wanted to, you could actually call save high score here as well. I'm not going to do that. But by all means, you could do that and take just a little bit of a hit. It's not a big deal. And that way, even if the game crashes, the high score will be set. Well, that wraps up the high scores. But let's do a couple more things in this session. And that's just some general cleanup. So right now in my code, I've just kind of been generating the methods wherever they've been generated. So I'm going to pull this down here. And I'm going to start putting these in somewhat more of a logical order, so it might be a little bit easier for me to find things. So for example, my update high scores, I'm going to put that somewhere close to my score. In fact, I'm just going to put this down here after all the events. So we have our events. So let's move strike text down here after the events as well. Once you put that there, and let's see what else we have. So that's the regular event, and this is us hooking up the events, preparing the items return. All right, hiding the strike text, we'll also move that down to right underneath show strike text. So just something I do every once in a while is kind of clean up where my methods are. Some people like to put them in alphabetical order. I just like to have them somewhat logically here, because if I'm really looking for something, I'm in a hurry, and I'll just, in Visual Studio, I'll click on this drop down and quickly find the method I'm looking for. All right, so that's real minor cleanup there. But the next thing I want to do is talk about all these magic strings I have all over the place, right? So I have game controller, I have strike text and score text and high score text. I have all the stuff in my logs I'm not concerned about. So I'm not concerned about those. But down here, I actually have score and high score. I have even a strike text here is hard-coded. So what I want to do is actually create a class, another static class. And I'm going to call this res for resources. So I'm going to hit new class. And I'm going to just call it res for resource. Get rid of my namespace so don't run into that issue again. And we're going to make it a public static class res. And we need to add in some strings here. So I'm going to say public static read only, because no need for it to change, string. And game controller, because we know we had that one. Let's see. Let's see what else we had here. So game controller, I think, was the very first one. Very first magic string. So we will cut him out and say res dot game controller, right? That way, if we ever want to change this stuff, we don't have magic strings everywhere. That's the whole point of this cleanup. It's not required, but it's something I do as the game gets, a little bit of flesh on its bones, just to make sure that I don't have a maintenance nightmare going forward. So do the same thing here with our strike text, score text, and high score text. So we'll say strike text, score text, and high score text. All right, come back over here, and of course this is now going to be res dot strike text and res dot score text and res dot high score text. All right. So these are all debug logs. I don't care about those strings. And okay. So let's take a look at our update score. If we ever wanted to change that, I want this to be there as well. So I'm going to actually say res score like that, and go back to our res, and we'll actually create this guy. So public static read only string score is equal to score with the space. And the reason why I do that is because maybe we want multiple spaces there, maybe we don't want a space at all later on. I don't need to worry about my code. I just know that whatever that string is, it's going to be placed right up against the actual score. Okay. Similarly, we want to do the same thing for high score here. And make him call it high score. And I believe that's going to get rid of all of our magic strings. Oh no, it's not. We need our strike text here too. So what am I going to call this? Something like res strike x. Why not? And here we'll say a public static read only string strike x equals space and x. Alright, now is that everything? Yes. Everything else with a string appears to only be debug logs. So we're good there. And just to make sure we didn't break anything, let's go back and actually run the game. Okay, so our score's being set correctly, our high score's being set correctly with the text. Once we get a strikeout here, we'll see if the strikeout text is being set. I might have beaten the high score trying to get a strikeout. That's the way it usually works. Yep. We tied the high score. And now we just beat the high score. So, alright. Just trying to get a strikeout, people. That's my first strikeout. I got to score 30 before I got my first strikeout. But it worked. We have the X. While we're on here, might as well finish out the game. Second strikeout. And the third strikeout with the 3 X's. And just to make sure it gets reset still. Shouldn't be any issue. That logic's there. Perfect. So all of our magic strings are now in this resource file. And that way we don't have to worry about messing up our text in some way, misspelling it or something of that nature. Okay. So I'm going to close everything but that. And yeah, so I think that's going to wrap it up for this session. We worked on the high scores. We were able to get the actual logic in place. We talked to the player prefs to save the high score and to load it back in. The text is being updated. We then took the opportunity to go and just reorganize our methods. And then we create the res file, res.cs. And I just call it res because it's quicker to type. But resource res, and for that we had our static strings in there, read-only strings, and that way we don't have a lot of magic strings in our game controller. In the next session, we're actually going to be adding in animations. So animations, it's going to be a longer session, so I'll just prepare you for that. But we're going to actually animate these items. So these items are going to be shuffled around when it's the new turn. Instead of just them showing up, they're actually going to shuffle around to appear that the P's getting moved around. So hopefully you're enjoying this series. If so, hit that like button so I'll know that you are and that you're enjoying these, you're watching them. And if you're not, by all means hit that dislike button so I'll know not to do this in the future and to spend my time doing something a little bit differently. But if you did enjoy it and you want to be notified when the next one comes out, which will be next week, by all means hit that subscribe button. I'm always creating content every single week around mixed reality development, whether it's HoloLens development or these immersive headsets. So by all means hit that subscribe button if you like the content. I hope you have a fantastic week, and I'll see you in the next video.